Now, without further ado, let's welcome our guest of honor today, Shortbox Nation. It's Jim Zub. What up, Jim? How you doing?
Hey, how's it going?
Jim, not too shabby. I was browsing your website today, just going through your blogs. For starters, congrats. First of all, your website is extremely organized. It's like mad impressive how much you've cataloged about your career on the website, and then how much you keep up with like the blogs, and you just write about your life and life as a writer, and you're always dishing out great advice. But I was reading your blog from like either earlier this week, but you were talking about like just the season that we're in. We're recording this episode on Monday, December 22nd. It's the week of Christmas. I don't know about you, but I've got a to-do list that looks like a CVS receipt. It is insane how much stuff I still have to do before we get into with the holidays and stuff. But I don't know. It just got me thinking about, man, I'm a madman. I'm recording I'm recording the Monday before Christmas. But what makes me feel better is that you're also here recording with me. So
there's still a lot to get done, before the holidays. It's that last little burst of momentum, I think, before we really get to rest. But then I've got a break all the way from Christmas through to first week of January, and then dive back into it. But it's still making comics. It's not all that bad, let me tell you.
How often do how often do good ideas come to you during like the holiday break? Or do you like try to turn your brain off? Like, I'm not thinking about work. I'm not thinking about comics.
I don't think you can ever fully turn it off, especially when you talk about art or you're talking about writing. Like, you're always taking in material. So whether you're out, like I was out, finishing up Christmas shopping this morning with my wife, and we were just wandering around downtown Toronto. There's a thing called the St. Lawrence Market, which is this amazing like farmers market, all kinds of great stalls there and things. And we're just talking. We're talking on the subway on the way down. We're talking while we're walking around. And you're always just sort of, my wife's a writer as well, so you can't help but constantly be talking about character and story and narrative. We're watching all kinds of different holiday films, but we're just watching movies that we wanted to catch up on in general. And that always stirs discussion. What's good? What's bad? What would you do differently and why? I think that's one of the most useful kind of conversations that she and I have. It's not just about, was this good? Was this bad? Which can be useful depending on how you're breaking something down. But one of the sort of things we'll do is we'll do this conversation like, okay, let's say you were given that cut of the film. You're the executive producer or you're the director, and you realize, okay, this is the film we've got, or this is the show we have before us, or this is the comic in front of us. What is the least amount of changes you can make to make this stronger? What is if you have to try and trim a bit, or you have to try and add a scene, or you have to enhance a few lines to try and get as much characterization or fix a problem, what would it be? And it's a neat little exercise for us as, kind of writers and narrators and things like that, building a plan or coming up with, your ability to kind of critique and self-critique and better understand how stories and narrative are built. Yeah.
What's the last movie that you guys watched together where you did this exercise and had a lot of things you would change?
I don't tend to throw mud like that. So we watch sometimes it's really small stuff too. Like, it doesn't have to be expansive, because that's the easy cheat. If you just say, well, I just tear that whole character out. You're like, no, you can't do that. Like, if you again, the least amount of changes is humanly possible. What's also funny is sometimes we'll talk about those kinds of things, and then you find out, oh, there's deleted scenes, and that had some of that material where you're oh, the director was thinking the same thing, but somewhere in the edit they had to cut bits out, or somewhere some disconnect kind of happens. It's fascinating though, watching like, holiday films or watching nostalgic films where you're like, stuff you grew up on and in your head you remembered a certain way, and then you rewatch it as an adult and you're like, oh, parts of this still work or parts of this don't work at all. Like, whether it's tastes have changed or pacing is different or the way we build narratives is different, or acting, the more broad or whatever. It's just neat to kind of look at that through a different lens.
You know what? I'm going to keep this in mind when I end up watching Jingle All the Way later today. Even though that's a perfect film, so there probably won't be much conversation.
Not a single cut you would ever make.
Jim, before we hopped on the call, I was about 10 15 minutes into your TED Talk from 6 years ago. And can I say it was so endearing, man. It was such an endearing watch and listen, and I loved hearing your perspective on Dungeons and Dragon, how it
Yeah.
has ties to, you know, like this primal basic thing within all of us when it comes to storytelling. But I was really moved by your, you know, just talking about your relationship with your older brother and wanting to,
Hmm.
you know,
And
emulate
the
him and
way
just
it
be,
changed my life, you know,
yeah,
like I would not be a writer, I would not be a storyteller without Dungeons and Dragons and other tabletop role playing games. It absolutely unlocked something in me, not just to, you know, I think they're a desire to create stories rather than just passively have stories kind of happen, right? Like, and that's, I think, you know, the thing we were just talking about. When I watch a movie, when I read a book, I'm thinking about, okay, where does my taste fall with this? Do I like it? Do I not like it? Why? And I think that, you know, the desire to create, the desire, you know, moving away from the passivity of just being an audience member. And for better or for worse, you've decided you want to make stuff. So then you're constantly analyzing, you're constantly building, you're constantly thinking about character, you're constantly thinking about, you know, engagement. And the feedback that I love about something like D&D, where you're with either friends or strangers and you're kind of bringing them into this narrative, and then they get to make, you know, decisions and choices. And in our day-to-day lives, yeah, you get to pick whatever kind of coffee you want to get at Starbucks or something, but in this narrative you get to make meaningful choices
yeah,
that can swing the whole kind of adventure, swing the whole story. And someone is looking at you and saying, what do you do? And within the frame of the Dungeons and Dragons narrative, there are consequences. There are consequences for those choices. There's consequences for those roles and all the excitement that that can bring with it. And yet at the same time, it's also kind of safe.
yeah.
I was watching this great video. There's this guy, Michael Shea. He, online, I think his handle is Sly Flourish, and he does all these D&D advice videos and stuff like that, role-playing games. And he was talking about the duality of tabletop role-playing, that there's sort of these two main kind of mindsets. On one hand, I don't know if you've played D&D or other tabletop games like that.
I've
Have
only
you
maybe
ever?
sat in on one D&D
Oh,
session.
man, you gotta dive
Well,
into it, because
well, that's the
it's
thing.
different. Watching live play stuff is vaguely interesting, but then realizing someone's asking you and you're making
Mhm.
the decision on the spot, it makes all the difference. But he describes that connection that you have with other people when you're playing a really good game, that you are building something that you couldn't have built individually, that we as a group are going to come up with this thing and we're going to build these memories and have this cool adventure together. And so in some ways it's really important, because at this moment we're all making this thing and it's going to be really cool. But on the other hand, it's still just a game, and there doesn't have to be lasting negative repercussions. It's all positive and fun. And so it's a fun thing and it's a casual thing, but it can also be quite a, you know, an engaging and intense kind of thing too. It's the duality of that is something that I find really engaging and amazing about it.
Yeah, no, that TED Talk was excellent, and I'd recommend anyone that's into role playing or D&D to give it a watch. But it got me thinking about, you know, you talk about you know, D&D being the opportunity for you and your brother to really
Mm-hmm.
bond, and I guess I wanted to hear, what was your first conscious memory of comic books, and
Of
what came
comics, I
first,
mean,
comic books or D&D?
probably comics, but you know, in that classic sense of like newspaper comic strips, you know, whether that's like Garfield or Calvin
Hmm.
and Hobbes or um, Hagar the Horrible, and you know,
Yeah,
like reading those in
Prince
the
Valiant and
newspaper
all
and
that.
quite liking them. And then eventually the Electric Company, which was this magazine that had Spider-Man comics in them, but they were really simplistic. And for a younger, you know, readership, that I really, really liked. And then the Spider-Man cartoon and stuff like that. So comics came first in terms of memories and engagement and things like that. But my older brother, he was my proto nerd, right? 4 years older than me. And so when he got into comic books, I got into comic books, or he was
Yeah,
into,
yeah.
you know, sci-fi and sword and sorcery. And so I get into those novels as well. And I was trying to read above my current reading level or understand more and things like that. And then eventually fell in really in depth. I started collecting the GI Joe comics
Hmm.
during that original 80s run, because that was my action figure, you know, kind of obsession for a while when I was a young kid. And then through those, realizing that there was Spider-Man comics every single month, and I knew that character from the original Spider-Man cartoon and then Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, and then just started reading those obsessively and
Yeah.
really falling in hard on the Marvel Universe, especially the official handbook of the Marvel Universe. That was
Yeah.
like, I think there's something in kids, this is true of adults as well, but there's a particular formative age for kids that you want to codify your world, right? Whether it's you learn all the names of the Pokemon, or you want to know sports stats, or you want to put things in buckets. You want to organize your world because the world seems like such a chaotic and strange place. And whatever your hobby is at that age, that 7 to 10 years old, it sticks with you in some incredible, amazing way. And if it's video games, then it's video games. And if it's books, or it's comics, or it's, whatever. And for me, it was like, it was Dungeons and Dragons and it was the Marvel Universe. Those two things just really adhered to my brain. And the codification of something like the official handbook of the Marvel Universe, which was this, encyclopedic breakdown of what Marvel was at that point in time, with these written in this way that seemed very authoritative, and would talk about the history of these characters as if these were factual things that had all happened in order. And so in the early 80s, late 80s even, you don't have trade paperbacks. There are very few comic stories that have been collected in that format. And you can't afford the really expensive back issues. So the official handbook of the Marvel Universe was telling you these stories and their importance, and you just have to trust it as gospel because you're never going to get to read those in their original format. And so to me, it felt like this very codified, very well planned out architecture, of whatever, the House of Ideas, and how it's all put together, and all these amazing things, and these teams and these relationships, and they go on and on and on. And then the same kind of thing with the Monster Manual, which is this, guide to all the monsters of D&D in alphabetical order, broken down by type and where you find them and which ones are more powerful. And just sort of glomming onto that and obsessing over power levels and size levels and how these things all interrelate to each other. I think that really tapped into something fundamental at that age that I wanted to, proverbially get it all in my brain and understand it and unwrap it. And I could obsess over it in a way that, few other things in my life grabbed me at that particular formative age. Yeah.
I love hearing that, because last year, maybe 2 years ago, one of my best pickups at a local con was these 3 really nice black binders, and on the front they said Marvel, the Marvel handbook, the handbook of the Marvel Universe, and it was volumes 1 through 3. Someone had I guess printed out, or not printed out, they had taken the original handbooks and perforated them so they would fit in this binder, and they separated them into 3 whole volumes. And I mean, I got it for like $20. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, that crazy obsessive quality to it. And it was an amazing resource, and I still have them. And nice. What's great is when I'm working on Marvel stuff, I don't look to them as current reference because obviously so much time has gone by. But what I find it useful to do is I can flip through them and just sort of browse and go, hey, whatever happened to that guy? And then just kind of, then I go to the wiki and start digging in and see what's current with that character. Or, oh yeah, that storyline. What about that? And just it becomes kind of a germinator rather than knowing, everything about everything. It just sort of reminds me of funky old bits and pieces, and then I'm just sort of like, oh. And now of course we have access to all the digital archives of something like the Marvel Unlimited, so I can actually go back and read those stories, which is also kind of fun because I'll have read some of those things in terms of the description in the handbooks, and then I go back, oh, now I can just sort of read those old storylines and realize they're probably not they weren't as well planned out. There's 100 writers who have contributed to these things, sometimes quite contradictorily, in terms of the stories. But when you read them in the handbook, man, that was gospel. It was really, really cool.
Absolutely. How much time would you say you spend just reading?
I do a lot of research, and I don't know that that's the norm with a lot of other comic writers. Not to say I'm unique in that way.
Like when you say, when you say a lot of time, like a rough ballpark estimate in a regular week.
Oh, geez, it does vary so wildly, especially with my convention schedule. But I'd say I'm spending almost as much time reading and researching as I do writing. That it's almost 1-to-1. Where, particularly if it's a new project, like the longer you go on a particular run of characters, the more you've internalized that and you've built up your own kind of reference pool and whatnot. But if you're starting on a new project, I'll dig in pretty deep because I want to understand as much as I can about a character, especially characters that have been around for a long time. even if I think I know them, even if I've got a good handle on them or I've read a bunch of the stories, I want to reread them with an eye for, okay, I'm going to be writing, Wolverine, or I'm going to be writing Captain America or whoever. Like, who is this, and what do I think is most important, or what is their current status quo, and how can I exemplify that while also trying to move, the baton forward. And that's kind of really important to me, that I feel, I guess, because of that quality, that the Marvel universe or the DC universe or any of these, whatever, I've worked on Samurai Jack or Rick and Morty or any of those kinds of things, that I treat them like those stories have happened and that they have value and that they are canon. And that's not to say that we can't tell new things or reveal new elements, but that you need to know what that foundation is in order to build strongly on top of it. And I just feel really strong about that. That if I nail that down in my head, it'll make for better, more relevant stories later, rather than me just stapling stuff on the side randomly and hoping that it fits. Something like Conan the Barbarian, where I've been, I reread all the original Robert E. Howard prose stories from the 1930s, but then also dug into the best of the comics and trying to really understand, okay, why do I like this character? What do I think is so great about them in their world? What do fans really love about this character? And exemplify those qualities while also trying to do things I haven't quite seen before, hopefully.
On the topic of that, I learned quite a few new things, doing my research for this interview, especially about Conan. The big three being, I either forgot or had no idea that Conan is much older than Superman.
About 6 years, yeah.
Yeah, I had no idea that he was integral in keeping Marvel afloat in the 70s. So it was like him, Star Wars comics, and Spider-Man comics.
Yeah,
and
those were the three big ones, in the 70s.
And then last but not least, that his paperbacks with the Frank Frazetta covers were selling literal millions on top of millions. That was new to me completely. I guess I bring all that up to say, the article I'm referencing, I mean, you do a really good job explaining like how Conan has evolved with pop culture, with society, whether that be like, the 70s Marvel comics or the 80s action movies, or news to me, Jason Momoa played Conan in the 2011 movie. I had no idea.
It did not do very well, but there was an attempt to reboot the movie franchise. But more people know Conan now through the video games, like, the younger generation. So they've done a ton of video games over the years, but the two big ones, Age of Conan, which was like a massive multiplayer online game, sort of World of Warcraft style. And then there's a game called Conan Exiles, which is like a survival game. I see it here. Almost like Minecraft, but you're Conan and you're naked running around and survive. Well, you're not Conan. You make a character who is in the Hyborian age and you awaken in this desert, and then you have to essentially survive. You have to gather leather to make yourself scraps. You have to, gather whatever stone to make yourself a stone axe to kill things to stay alive. And eventually you build up, power, and then eventually you build your own home, and you gain all sorts of different abilities and go on and on and on. And that game still has tons of subscribers every single month. And it, in this survivalist kind of mode, and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people have played that game. And so to a younger person, Conan has a pop culture footprint, but it's more through the video game stuff, or, the character is one of the DLC characters in the latest Mortal Kombat. So you can play Conan killing some of the Mortal Kombat characters. Like
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. It's weird how the character has really stuck around in a way that few other pulp characters have from the 1930s.
But why do you think that is? Like, what is it about Conan, through your research and your perspective, that has made Conan survive this long? Considering, like you said, there's a lot of pulp characters from the 30s.
I think, iconic characters stick around because they have an intrinsic quality to them that speaks to something larger than themselves, right? And I think in the case of Conan, he is, first of all, he's a foundational character of the sword and sorcery genre, and he exemplifies the idea of the wandering warrior, and that a survivor, someone who can go into unknown places and survive whatever the world throws at them, and then the world sort of changes on the edge of their blade, that his will and his physicality changes things. Wherever he goes, something amazing, exciting, and transformative is going to happen. And it's the kind of, aspirational stuff that we don't get to have happen in our life, but we wish did, that one person can go somewhere and make massive change, that someone can be that we can be the ultimate kind of survivor, that we can put up whatever blows the world throws at us. And there's also something intrinsic beneath that surface. If you read the original Robert E. Howard stories, and most of them are short stories, you can read them in one sitting. The theme that keeps coming up over and over again, sometimes subtle and sometimes quite broad, is this idea of savagery versus civilization. And that Conan is called a barbarian and he's called a savage, and he's from, a non-civilized, the land of Samaria and whatnot, and he enters the civilized world, and yet his will is the one that survives out whatever that conflict is. But not only that, but this idea that the civilized world, and I'm using hanging air quotes for that, the governments and kingdoms and religions, that they claim to have a superiority and a civilization and a moral authority, and yet they're the duplicitous people. They're the ones that will lie and cheat and backstab you and say one thing and do something else. And Conan, the savage, again hanging air quotes there, he will say the truth, and he will say what he thinks, and he'll say, if you cross this line, I'll kill you. But he'll also say, if we're allies, I'll fight by your side. And to my dying breath, we shall fight till the very end. And if he says it, he does it. And I think so then in that scenario, who is truly civilized and who is truly savage, right? And that is kind of the dichotomy at the heart of the character that makes him more than just the lunkhead barbarian that people assume he is, or just big dude with a sword. There's any kind of iconic character creates a template. And this is something else that's really I've discovered and I understand. And you see it over and over again with these iconic characters. And in order for people to tell a story of a barbaric warrior or a lone warrior or a wanderer, this kind of thing, you are either leaning into or purposefully leaning away from the tropes of that character. So by the very fact that you have to acknowledge Conan, either by leaning into or leaning away from it, in some ways you're reinforcing the template. It's like Superman is the superhero template.
Sure.
So the act of making a character fly or not fly is choosing to be more or less like Superman. To give a cape or to not have a cape is to purposefully lean into or lean away from a Superman archetype. And by doing that, what you're saying is we have to paint outside the lines or paint within the lines of Superman in order to define this character and their superheroic identity. And I think the same thing is true of Conan, that the character is arguably the most well-known fantasy character on the planet. Like the Lord of the Rings characters are, I'd say, equally, they have just as much awareness, but my mom doesn't remember the name of the individual hobbits, but she knows who Conan is. Do you know what I mean? Like people will say, oh, Game of Thrones. And if you're a fan, you would know the names of all those characters, but most people just know the name of the book. Your average person on the street who didn't watch the show obsessively. And so but Conan is the name of the character, which is the name of the
archetype.
Right. And, that's what I think makes that so potent and powerful. You can be almost anywhere and they at least know who Conan is. And that's a wild thing. Yeah.
I guess when you consider, this is a character that was, birthed in the 30s and, it's 2026 and we're still, he's still going strong in a bunch of different media. What would you say has been the most radical different take on Conan?
Departure?
Departure.
I mean, there's a kids cartoon, from the 90s,
from the 90s
that is, it's, and they have to kidify a bunch of those elements in a way in order to whatever they were trying to sell toys and what may have you. So I'd say that's probably the furthest from the source material. Although surprisingly, it's stuff that's not parody, if you're saying official-ish material. Honestly, the John Milius movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger is not a very clean adaptation of the original stories. It's taken on its own pop culture kind of milieu now at this point, and in many ways helped propel the character out to superstardom in a way that very few other fantasy characters have ever had. But Milius also took a bunch of his own kind of philosophical stuff and injected it in there. He also he took a little bit of Kull the Conqueror's origin and sprinkled in there. Even the name of the villain, Thulsa Doom, is from a Kull the Conqueror story, not from Conan the Barbarian. And so it's this fascinating thing where I think the Milius movie is an amazing sword and sorcery film. And the purists, the people who absolutely love Robert E. Howard and the original stories, in the 80s, they didn't love it, because Arnold is a great physical presence, but he's not a philosophical kind of actor. And Conan in the original Weird Tales stories, he's much more, it sounds weird to say eloquent, but he is. He's actually kind of poetic and lyrical, thoughtful, and thinking about broader issues of morality in a way that the movie does it, but it's spoken through other characters. Like there's a character, the wizard character who's played by Mako. He does the narration and he's saying things, or the archer character Subutai. He says a bunch of philosophical things, and Arnold's Conan responds to it a little bit, but it's not the same kind of stuff. In the original stories, a lot of that is driven by the Cimmerian himself. And so it's weird now because I'm the flagship writer of Conan the Barbarian, which I can't help but laugh every time I say it out loud because it's such an insane, weird, thing to be and to do. But I have a much greater appreciation now of that source material and the strengths of it, Yeah.
Can you speak to this or give me a little more information? I read somewhere that in preparation to write Conan, that you ended up working with an archaeologist and a pulp historian to make sure that you were like as accurate as possible, or honoring,
so
Robert E. Howard.
I wrote some Conan stories before that. So I wrote a Conan story at Dark Horse. I wrote a bunch at Marvel, but then the chance to relaunch the series at Titan and work directly with the rights holders at Heroic Signatures came up. And that was when I was sort of like, the Marvel series wrapped up during lockdowns and the pandemic and all that kind of stuff. And I felt like we'd gotten this short shrift, not through any fault of our own, but just the market forces. And obviously everyone was distracted with other things happening in the world. And I got to work on one of my favorite characters, and it didn't go the way I wanted it to. And, then I got this second chance, and no one gets to write these iconic characters ever. And then the chance to potentially do it twice is insane. And so I kind of knew it was all on the line. I could make whatever grousing I wanted about, what I would do differently. And now I was being given the chance to do it again. And so I took the project very, very seriously. And I wanted to understand and unearth as much of that research as humanly possible. And luckily, Heroic has, on one of the people they work with is this guy, Jeff Shanks, and he's an archaeologist and he's a pulp historian, and he obsesses over this stuff, and he's collected it for decades, and he knows the material really, really well. And just getting to talk to him, because although Howard wrote 21, arguably plus a couple fragments, like 21 Conan stories, there's hundreds of issues of the comics, and there's pastiche novels, and there's all this other related media. And Howard wrote hundreds of other short stories. He wrote horror stories and westerns and boxing tales and Arabian adventures and all this other kind of stuff. And Jeff was such a phenomenal resource, and is such a phenomenal resource because he can contextualize things. So we will talk about the big plans that I've got for the series, and then he'll say, okay, here are other Robert E. Howard stories that speak to the kinds of things that you want to do. So read those to get into that mode. Or he'll say, these are the movies and these are the books that Howard wrote that got him obsessed with those kinds of things. So you can go even deeper than the bedrock. You can go into the foundational material that inspired the author in the first place and try and glean some knowledge from that as well. Here's what's happening historically in Texas around the time that he wrote that story. And that's why those particular themes come out so strongly, or that's why those particular elements are part of that. Or geographically, the Hyborian Age, which is the, prehistory of our world where Conan's running around going on his adventures. Here's all the different source materials that Howard's drawing upon and using for his own kind of inspiration, and getting as much of that stuff and sort of downloading it to my brain to try and better understand and put it in the proper context, or put it into a context that I can then make the kinds of stories that I think will be entertaining and engaging. And that's just it's a fun process. It's like this endless puzzle, and it's a cool challenge, and that way, when I came around to relaunch the series in 2023, it was with as much of that love and knowledge of the source material as I possibly could, and that I could try and take as much of, the character's been around for 90 years, and it's like clearly it speaks to something intrinsic. Rather than me trying to reinvent the whole thing, it's okay, so why does this thing continue to resonate? Why does this character continue to stick around? What speaks to me about that character? And why do, if this character was best-selling in the 70s and the 60s with those paperbacks, and in the 70s with the comics, most of that audience isn't dead, but they're not currently reading the comics. Why? How do we bring them back?
Yeah.
And then if I exemplify those qualities, hopefully, how can I entice brand new readers to get on board and see those qualities in the stories that they maybe didn't even realize that were there and could speak to them as well? And that's been kind of without trying to sound too crass, the ultimate success of it is that the series is doing very well. Titan has this, world beater of a book, thankfully, that is doing better than any of us could have imagined. There was talk of the relaunch internally, and we were sort of like, okay, Conan is a very international property. And I think they had 6 or 7 languages already lined up for foreign editions. And they're like, look, even if the book can break even in English, we'll make it up in the foreign market and make sure that the book is profitable, but just make the best damn book you can. And thankfully, the English version's doing great. And now we've picked up even more languages. We're currently in 11 languages with the Conan series. And so it's doing better than, we anticipated. And it's branching out even further. And over the long haul, some of those old readers are coming back. And the good word of mouth is bringing those people back into the stores. Anecdotally, and both in terms of sales, I hear over and over again, every time I do a convention, these classic readers are coming back, and guys old enough to be my dad coming over and like hearty handshakes and thanking me for bringing, Conan back to them, which is, it's an absolute honor,
Well, I gotta say, the current flagship run is what got me fully on board with the Conan, Conan hype train. And this is coming from someone who grew up on Conan, but always looked at it as my dad's books. My dad loves Conan, like that is his guy. He's got all the magazines. I mean,
oh man,
he used to
hear
show
this in the best way possible.
Oh yeah, for sure. No, 100%. He would show me like when I was first getting into comics, it was his books that I was reading to get into it, and a lot of it is from like 70s and 80s Marvel. And he always pointed towards the black and white Savage Sword of Conan magazines to show me like, hey, this is how. He was also a really big art nerd, so he would study like
and
the
such
John
good
Buscema's.
quality. Some of those older ones are just phenomenal. And the black and white format, the magazine, first of all, it didn't have the comics code authority, so they could go deeper in terms of violence and sexuality.
That's right.
But not only that, but the slightly oversized magazine and the black and white, you strip away all the color, and so the line work has to work on its own merits. It has to create and summon so much atmosphere. And so many artists came into their own, like young artists really came into their own on that book. But guys like John Buscema, it was delivering at such a high level because the love of the character was coming through. And that's kind of our watchword. Like, we want to create the kinds of stories that hopefully stick around decade after decade and speak to that level of consistency and quality. I had one of my buddies in the industry, he meant it as sort of a cast off insult. And he said, how does it feel to be everyone's dad's favorite new comic book writer? And I said, dude, that is an absolute compliment. I don't know what you're talking about. First of all,
kind of a cool title.
You're talking to, a generation of people who the comics were one of the biggest things in their lives, and that we've been able to rekindle that, fire for them is huge. But second of all, and this, I don't care if it sounds crass, guess who has disposable income? Your dads. You know what I mean? Like, guess who's willing to spend that money on stuff they love? Those guys. And I meet them now at every single convention. Like, these guys will come to the show specifically to meet me, and their kids will go off and go searching for anime. And these guys will beeline towards my table, and we'll have a 15-minute conversation. You know what I mean? And,
awesome.
And they tell me about growing up with the character and how much it meant to them. And they had a subscription to Savage Sword magazine, and they haven't regularly collected stuff in a comic store for 20, 25 years. And now they're in the shop day and date on release, for these new issues, because it speaks to them and they feel like they're 15 again or whatever. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, no, that's great. I want to talk about where Conan is at now. So the flat by the time, like I said, we're recording this December 22nd. As of today, the flagship series Conan the Barbarian is up to issue 27. By in a couple weeks, January I think 7th, you'll have a Conan Scourge of the Serpent issue 4 come out, which will wrap up that mini series. Where is Conan today story wise? Like
Right.
what? Yeah.
So one of the things I wanted to do in the original Marvel run, it roughly traces Conan's life kind of in order. They do eventually jump over in Savage Sword to some older stories, or they eventually do a separate series called King Conan, where he is the king of Aquilonia. But for the most part, if you're reading the flagship book, it's one relatively continuous story that they're doing. Dark Horse tried to do it even more comprehensively, where they started with what they considered, the earliest Conan story, and they were just going to carry through continuously. And I decided we were going to take a different tack, because obviously you have these two major publishers that have done this over decades. We have to do something different. The original Weird Tales stories of Conan, the prose stories that Robert E. Howard wrote, were not in chronological order. The very first story, 1932, is Phoenix on the Sword, and Conan is a king already. And so they jump around the timeline. Sometimes he's young, sometimes he's older. But if you read them in publishing order, there's usually a thematic connection between them. He talks about his days on the high seas in one story, and then the next story that's a story of him as a pirate, something like that. And so I thought I wanted to emulate something like that, where we were doing kind of, rather than chronological, we were like thematically going in order. That if you read them in order, you will always emotionally and information wise have what you need in order to go on to the next story. Even if we're jumping forward or jumping back in the timeline, you will understand eventually why we did that and what information you need for what's coming down the line. And it means that we're not trying to fill in every single gap, because I think that there's a mistake in that, in the sense that, again, these are iconic characters. How many stories are between Tower of the Elephant and, Queen of the Black Coast? An infinite number of adventures. Like, that's the simple truth of it, right? These characters are going to be published on and on and on. But in my continuity, there's going to be X number of stories, and we'll slowly uncover them over the span of the series, or these are the important parts and these are the high notes you need to know, because it's going to carry out other cool narrative things that we're doing down the line. And so when I was launching the series, we didn't know how well it was going to do. I was promised 12 issues no matter what. And so we did a free comic book day number 0. We did 1 to 12. But by the time we got to like issue 3 and 4, and it was selling, like the first issue had 6 printings. We had 3 printings of issue 2, 3, and 4. And so it was like, okay, the book's a hit. It's doing really well. The momentum is there. The readership's coming back. And now we've stabilized at a really awesome sales number. And then with special issues like issue 25 that came out right before New York Comic Con, our sales shot up because we did this really special anniversary issue, fully painted every page. And that brought a bunch of people in the door to sample it, and a bunch of them are sticking around now. And so it's like, great. We have this longer term plan. Like, essentially, Heroic came to me and said, we know you want to do more than just 12 issues. What is the plan? And we kind of laid out this big mythic arc of what I wanted to do with the character and where we're going to go. And that we eventually plotted on to 50 issues.
Wow.
So I want to be on the book, through to issue 50. And so we're just past the halfway point now of that big mythic story. And in addition to the 12, monthly issues per year, we also have a mini series that we're doing now every year. So that mini series becomes a pillar for big, broader kind of payoffs. And those payoffs include not just Conan the Barbarian, but other Robert E. Howard characters. So although Conan's the most popular 10 times over, you've got other characters like Solomon Kane or Kull the Conqueror, or these eldritch investigators named Kirwan and Conrad, or this like Arabic adventurer guy named El Borak, or like all these other characters that were in the stories that Robert E. Howard wrote, and they carry on cool thematic things, and they actually tie together in terms of continuity. So if Conan is in the prehistory of our world, he's essentially traversing the land and finding the relics and treasures of the time of King Kull, who was in the time of Atlantis and all this stuff. And in our modern world, we find some of the relics of both the Hyborian Age and the Atlantean Age, And so it's this cool kind of pulpy continuity, and we're never going to go past the 1930s because that's the time when they were written. But they're all going to sort of connect together into this bigger, broader, massive story that talks about myth making and heroism and survival and all kinds of stuff like that. So if you're reading the Conan monthly book, you're always going to be in the Hyborian Age, and you're going to get your, Conan style adventure and sword and sorcery. But if you read the events book, so last year Battle of the Blackstone and this year's Scourge of the Serpent, you get to see even bigger cosmic stuff that's happening, ripple effects because of what Conan's doing and what these other heroes are interacting with.
Jim, I want to bring up a couple names because on the topic of the Conan series, the spinoffs, you've been very fortunate to work with some stellar creative,
unbelievable. The artists are phenomenal.
I want to bring up 3 names in particular, and I want you to tell me what comes to mind. Share an anecdote, whatever it may be. First and foremost, let me just say this really quick. The name is going to be Roberto de la Torre, the artist who you launched this new flagship series with. And I just want to say personally, thank you for introducing to me like one of the. Man, I mean, this dude
unbelievable.
Remarkable. And I hate, and the way that I've been describing him to a lot of other friends and trying to get people on this Conan book is, and it feels like I feel weird comparing him, but I've told a lot of people, hey, Roberto de la Torre, what he's doing on this Conan series is like the second coming of John Buscema.
It's John Buscema by way of Frank Frazetta with a bit of Alec Toth. It's he's a phenomenal, fully formed artist. He's an incredible talent, and he's such an amazing artist that brings just the most classical, powerful kind of storytelling chops. But it never feels derivative. Like it's so, the storytelling is so pure and the design sense is so good, and that explosive sense of momentum, beautiful light and shadow. He's just a phenomenal artist. I first discovered his work actually when I was starting to work on Conan at Marvel. And some people sent me, he had done work at Marvel, he had done some superhero stuff, but none of it looked like the
like
what
it is now.
Stuff. He's come into his own in a way that's really, if you haven't seen it, it's hard to describe, but it is absolutely phenomenal. But he started doing these commission pieces. From what I was told, he started doing these commission pieces, and someone asked him to do a Conan. And man, whoever that fan was, you changed the course of my life and so many other people's lives. And so he did this Conan piece, and it was on one of those comic art fans or one of those kind of forums. And then because people saw it and they go, man, that is some badass Conan, another person commissioned a Conan and another person commissioned a Conan. And all of a sudden his commission list went from a variety of different superhero and other pop culture characters to just mainlining Conan and Red Sonja and Hyborian Age stuff.
Wow.
And then people started sending them to me, and I was just sort of blown away. I begged my editor to get him to do a variant cover for us. And I was like, man, I would love for him to do some of the issues or things like that. And so Marvel brought him on to do one story he did for King Size Conan, the special that they put together. He also did a story in the last issue of Conan that Marvel published, Conan the Barbarian number 25. But he and I actually bought a commission from him just as a fan. And so we started Facebook messaging back and forth, and we were chatting about, Conan and everything else. And I was saying how much I hope that we would get to work together someday. And then, the run at Marvel ends and the license wraps up there. And he messaged me and said, oh man, it sucks we never got to work together on the character. And I said, yeah, it's too bad. Maybe another time. And we were sort of dallying back and forth, talking about the potential of doing a creator-owned thing, or maybe we do like file the serial numbers off and do some Bronan, like, some kind of something that will be a lot of fun.
Bronan is a great
word. Just whatever, And then I pitched to take over the Titan run, and there were 7 or 8 other writers that pitched to do the book. And so I didn't think I had a hope in hell of getting it. And lo and behold, I ended up catching the diamond again, and they asked me to write the book. And then, my concern was, hey, people think they already know what my Conan run is going to be like because I just did it at Marvel. We've got to really make them sit up and take notice, both in terms of the storytelling and in terms of the art. And I said, we should get Roberto de la Torre. And the guy who owns Conan, Fred Malmberg, he said, we've tried to reach out to him, but he seems like a mystery man. We don't have a line of communication. And I said, well, I do, because I was talking to him on Messenger. And so I ended up reaching out to him and saying, okay, new plan, Rob. So instead of us doing a creator-owned book, why don't you become the preeminent modern Conan artist? And I remember he just laughed, haha, yeah, sure, how? And I was like, I just got it back. Like I got my hand on the steering
Wow,
wheel
that's dope.
and I want to do this with you. And so I brought him into the fold and that launch has changed the course of my career.
For sure.
And I owe him a great deal for that. And it's been fun both as a fan and obviously as a collaborator to work with him. And he is, I think one of the things he was worried about early on was he didn't want to be dictated in terms of pacing. He didn't want to be told how many panels on a page and you have to show this and you have to show this after this, which, the standard in modern comic writing is what we call full script, which is exactly that. Page 1, panel 1, here's what's happening. Here's the dialogue, here's the text and whatever. And so I said to him, let's go old school. We'll do it just like they did in the 70s, like Roy Thomas or Stan Lee did. I'll write the plot outline. So I just say on this page, these things are happening. You tell me how many panels you need to do that. And by the end of the page, so-and-so's going out a window and so-and-so's got their arm cut off or, whatever may happen. Or this is the most important salient information on the page. You have to have this in order for the narration to function, but otherwise do it whatever you want. Conan's going to kick the crap out of however many people you want to draw. And if that's a small army, then I'll make it work in the narration. And then Rob sends the line art. He sends the beautiful, insane finished pages, the inks, and they're all traditionally done. And then I sit down to craft the narration and to craft the dialogue. And literally I'll look and go, oh, there's, this much space above Conan's head. I got room for 2 sentences, or I got, his expression looks like this. What comes to mind, or there's the original Robert E. Howard stories have such lyricism in their narration. And I'm trying to capture that on the page, not to copy it line for line, but to get that same kind of rhythmic quality or that same kind of bombast that was in the original stories. And when you look at Rob's art, you can't really, it's pretty easy to summon it because you look at it and you're like, oh my God, the visuals are so stunning.
Now that you bring it up, really quick. Now that you bring it up, I'm flipping through the Conan the Barbarian Volume 1, bound in Blackstone, which I recommend to anyone if you want to see the genius that is Roberto de la Torre. Check that out. But now that you bring it up, I'm looking at a preview page on Amazon. And it doesn't have the classic, like panel border layout. It really does give me, you're talking about classic comic strips.
It's a visual showcase. Yeah, the whole book it's an artist showcase. And it's not something I'd ever done before. I hadn't done plot style scripting.
It does feel very artist first. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a real challenge, but in the best way possible. And then when it came time to bring other artists into the fold for the series, I kind of had the toolbox I could offer them. I could say, do you want a full script or do you want to do this outline style? And for a bunch of the artists, I think they'd never even thought to do that before. It's a cool thing to sort of offer to them and go, hey, do you want to be the front man? Like, do you want to dictate the storytelling? Like, yes, we have 22 pages per month and I do need this to happen on the page turn, but beyond the scope of that pacing, you get to tell me how many panels it's going to take to make that happen. And you can combine actions into panels, or you can shatter them into tiny little panels, whatever you want to do, and I'll make the narrative fit, and they'll send those page roughs. And every so often I'll say, hey, I need a little bit more room for dialogue, or can we just nudge this over a little bit? But for the most part, it's really they get to be the choreographer of those layouts.
All right, let me ask you about another artist that is a frequent, creative force when it comes to the mainline flagship series. And I'm going to say this name because you wrote a really nice blog post about him, and I want to give him his flowers. Doug Braithwaite.
Oh my God. I'm such a huge fan. Yeah.
I think in your blog post you called him like one of the legends, one of those guys. And it made me think, I have no argument against that. He is one of the hardest working dudes in comics.
He's also one of the purest kind of artists. If you look at the quality of his figure work, it is classically trained, solid. Everything looks absolutely built. Like it feels like it exists in its own reality. He draws with a sense of detail, but not over detail. He's not trying to draw every blade of grass. you know, but when he draws a jungle, it feels thick and lush and crazy. He plays with light and shadow. He makes it look incredibly easy when you see how fast and how capably he's able to stage some complicated stuff. I've been a fan of his for so long. You know, I love the work he did at Marvel on books like Thor and the Punisher and stuff like that. And I didn't even think it would be possible for us to work with him. We lucked out that Titan, I think, knows him and had reached out to him to do a cover. And then we realized, okay, we know that Rob's not going to be able to do 12 issues in a year. It would be great if we could trade off. And so then the possibility, they were like, you know, do you think we could ask Doug about interiors, came up. And I wasn't sure he would, you know, grab the baton, but he did. And he had never drawn Conan. He had always wanted to. And we thought we would only have him for 4 issues. And thankfully, we collaborated so well together. And we just really got along really well. And he said, you know, I don't know the Conan stuff. I know the broad visuals and Barry Windsor Smith and John Buscema and Frank Frazetta, but I don't know all the, you know, line and verse. And I said, that's my job. Don't worry about that. I'll send you a reference. I'll get you on board. And we would have these great phone calls, and we would just have these great back and forth, you know, email chains with the editor. And by the end of that 4 issues, we said, you know, if you want to stick around, we'd be thrilled to have you. And he said, I don't normally do longer runs on books, but I actually can't think of any other book I want to do right now. So let's just keep it going. And now he's locked on with me. You know, he's doing pretty much every other arc on the series, which is, you know, such an honor. I just got to see him in November. I was in England for Thought Bubble, and we got to hang out there, and we've just really bonded over the whole thing. And he has been in this industry a good, you know, decade, maybe 15 years longer than me. And so he's also, I don't mind saying, sort of mentoring in that broader sense. Like he's given me a good feel for the ebbs and flows of this industry, you know, and to really appreciate where we're at right now. You know, I, in a similar vein, in September, I had a convention I did in Tennessee, and I went out for dinner with Ron Mars, you know, who's done legendary runs on Green Lantern and Silver Surfer, and we've become friends. And he's just like, he was wonderful. He essentially said, like, look, you're in the middle of this kind of run that if you can land this thing, it's evergreen, and people will always know you for this, and don't let that pressure break you. But on the other hand, like, relish it, like, enjoy that you're having one of those runs that people talk about. And you don't always know it's happening as it's happening, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And he said, you know, you really, he said, I hope you appreciate where you're at. And I was like, I do. I really do. Especially, I think, because, you know, I got to do it Marvel and now doing it again. And this is the one. It's not to mix my metaphors, whatever, lightning strikes twice and we caught it in the bottle on the second one. Like it's really captured something powerful in terms of the art teams that we've had, and the writing is really flowing, and we've got this big plan and it's paying off, and the readership is excited, and the good word of mouth. Like, I never want to take that for granted, and I never want to rest on my laurels. Like, I don't want people to just be like, oh man, that first year was so good, and now it's just sort of coasting. I'm like, no, every story arc I want to hit like a thunderclap, and I want people to be excited and not know where we're going next. I think that that's the challenge, is to keep pushing ourselves, you know? And when I send art between the artists, you know, Fernando Dagnino is currently, you know, drawing the next arc that's coming up after Doug, and Doug's, you know, in the midst of another arc of artwork, and they're sending artwork between each other and kind of getting each other pumped. Like, it's not competitive, and yet it kind of is. There's that sense of like, oh man, that looks amazing. Okay, I'm going to put even more effort into my pages. Or, you know, I see how good this one's coming together, and I'm like, oh, well, I gave that artist a really meaty, cool bit of story. Well, I got to give the next guy something even crazier, because now we gotta, you know, up the ante. And that is the best kind of challenge. It's the best kind of enthusiasm. It's the best kind of collaboration. This, you know, feels like such a special project and a special time in my life as a writer. And I'm really relishing that and the response from readers and retailers in a big, big way.
That sounds awesome to hear, man. And one thing I would compliment I want to pay you is that I love how open you are with your career the behind the scenes making of comics, the amount of information that you share on your website. I mean, there's so many articles and blog posts about
Thank
like,
you.
hey, here's how to write a script. Here's,
Yeah.
my advice on, networking and things, which I think is valuable. I mentioned in the intro that you were a former art professor at,
Mhm.
a college in Toronto. Do you ever miss teaching, or are you?
Well, this is a relatively recent thing. I was teaching full time. So my teaching career in Toronto started in 2004, and I was teaching. I was teaching full time from 2006 all the way to 20. Oh my God, 2023.
Oh, wow, that
I
much close. Okay.
I was a tenured prof, and so and it gave me, it was simultaneously an unbearable amount of stress because my creative career was growing and my writing career was taking off. But I knew, and I'd seen so many examples of other freelancers whose careers had washed out, and the teaching job was so stable. It's a really potent, union job. And I loved interacting with the students, and I loved iterating on the curriculum, and I was good at it, and so I knew I could have stuck with it. But at the end of the day, telling stories is really who I am. Like, it's intrinsic to myself. And I was burning out, like, in some weird ways. Everyone has stories about how during the pandemic, big changes, right? We were in
Hmm.
lockdowns and all that kind of stuff. And some people decide they were going to, move away because this was now their chance to change up their careers, or they lost their job and they were like, well, nothing matters. I'm going to take a real shift. And for me, it was in 2019, I was burning out because I had a full-time writing slate. I did over 40 comics, like 40 issues I wrote in 2019.
Wow.
Plus, I was teaching full time. And so I would come home, I would in the morning get up, get on the subway. I would either read my lecture notes or I would be doing research reading for writing. On my lunch hour, I would be rapidly typing responses for, comic emails or school emails. I would get home, I would have dinner with my wife. I would run up here to my studio, shut the door. And usually from around 7 till midnight, I was just either hacking away at emails or hacking away at scripts. And
Wow.
then most weekends, I'm out at a convention or I'm catching up on work, or you're squeezing in a little bit of time with friends and family. And my wife would joke about it, but she would be like, are we still married? Because there was times when I would literally go to bed and she had already fallen asleep. And then I would get up before she woke up and I would start responding to emails before I jump on the train to go to school. And she goes, the last thing I remember hearing before I fell asleep was the keyboard. And the first thing I hear waking up is the keyboard. Like, I don't know if you
Wow.
slept. And I was like, I
Huh.
did, but it was before, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, yeah,
and it
yeah.
was just on and on, week after week and month after month. And I was getting these opportunities to work on books I'd always wanted to and collaborate with people that I always wanted to. And that breakthrough that you hope for and you pray for your entire creative career. And so I didn't want to let anything go. But then I had the stability and the joy of teaching
For sure.
at the same time. And the only thing that was suffering was my personal life. Only thing, right? And so in some weird ways, the lockdowns and pencils down on a bunch of projects was a reset button for me to kind of look and go, okay, before I lose my mind, what is important? What really, really matters. I had a teaching sabbatical lined up that was supposed to start 2020. World spun off its axis, so I didn't end up doing that, obviously. I deferred that 3 times. So I finally took that sabbatical in 2024. And it was transformative because now I could just focus on my writing. And it was a joy again. And the Conan book was taking off and I felt really good. I was getting to travel to more conventions and have more of those interactions and enjoy them and stay places longer and travel with my wife, And so I think at that point the die was cast. It was like, okay, we got to slow down. We got to pick one path here. And, without trying to sound too corny, like, I paid my dues and
Yeah.
now it's not like it's not work. The big joke, some of the guys at the school were like, oh, you're retiring. I'm like, man, if this is retirement, I don't,
I did it
no,
wrong.
I have one career instead of 2.
Yeah.
And very thankful for the one I've got. Yeah.
I don't know. Did we mention that you were a professor teaching drawing and storytelling courses at
Yeah.
Seneca,
Seneca. Yeah.
Seneca, sorry,
No
Polytechnic.
worries.
I would like to know, what was your favorite topic or curriculum to teach during
That's a
your
good
teaching
question. So
years?
for a while, I actually taught animation history.
Oh
So I
wow.
love animation, and we were in an animation and filmmaking program. And so I have a huge archive of animation, all the way from silent films, like the earliest stuff pre-Disney, through to modern, animated films. I have a huge, huge library of animation, and contextualizing that and watching key films in class and teaching students that not only are their favorite artists inspired by stuff that feeds its way all the way back to the start of filmmaking, but that this stuff is a constant inspiration pool that they can draw upon, both literally and figuratively. That all their favorite creators, if they love the works of Miyazaki, I'm going to show them the 5 filmmakers that inspired Hayao Miyazaki. You know what I mean? Or if they love whatever, Frozen, like, let's look at Disney design and how it's changed over the decades and where that all comes from, and bring them a greater appreciation of where this stuff all flows, and also give them a lexicon in terms of art and language and storytelling, and an appreciation for this art form. And that course, sitting in a lecture hall and getting to watch films and watch them light up, and get excited about filmmaking, and learn this material and internalize it, not because they had to memorize it to do well on a test, but because they loved it the way I love it. You know what I mean? That was a joy. And it is a joy. It's one of the things I love about teaching. And I would tell them on the first day of school, I would say, if I do my job well, you're excited to come to class because you're going to walk out of here with more ideas and more inspiration, not just learning this stuff because you want to get a good grade. And when it worked, that was the whole thing. That's what made it so beautiful, was that we were all getting excited. And they would bring their own films, like they would bring modern stuff, as YouTube was taking off, and independent shorts and films were, they were getting inspired by weird video games and memes and strange stuff I had never seen before. And they would bring that to class and be like, Zub, have you seen this? And you would get you would realize that it's an ongoing conversation. It's not a one-way lecture. And that, I think, is also really cool. Anime is a perfect example. Like, I really like anime, and I was into it. My brother got me into anime because he went off to the University of Waterloo, and the original kind of anime fan clubs of the late 80s, early 90s, he kind of plugged into that stuff. When people were trading VHS tapes that had been copied and copied multiple times with fan subtitles and stuff like that, he got me into that.
Wow.
But obviously anime is now, transformative pop culture. It is mainstream culture. Anyone who thinks otherwise is a fool. But to see which shows the kids were really digging, and I say kids, these are 20 something, college students, but I would call them my kids because I couldn't help it.
Yeah.
But the kids would bring their whatever anime or whatever video games they were really into. And then I would be like, okay, there's whole areas of this stuff that I need to also get caught up on or get excited about or learn more about, Yeah.
You brought up your brother, and I just got to ask, what does he think about your career? Like, do you guys ever chop it up about comics or anime?
Yeah, I mean, it's weird. I think it's very strange for him. I think some people assume that, like, oh man, he must be my biggest fan. And I don't know that that's necessarily true. And I'm not saying that in a mean way. I think it feels really strange for him because his annoying younger brother is a comic book author and a D&D guy. Do you know what I mean? And so there have definitely been weird, amazing moments. Like, some of his closest friends are the nerds that he met in university, and a bunch of those guys are huge fans of my comics, so I think that's a weird thing.
Yeah.
The other thing is, we grew up on gaming and D&D and all that stuff. When we were kids, so there's a convention. It's now in Indianapolis, but it used to be in Lake Geneva, which is why it was originally called GenCon, and it's still called GenCon, even though it's no longer in Lake Geneva. And it's the biggest convention in North America for, role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons, or board games and card games like Magic the Gathering and stuff like that. And when we were kids, we always wanted to go to Gen Con, because if you looked at the original Dungeons and Dragons adventures, at the front, it would say, like, whatever, the name of the adventure. And then it would say, this was originally a tournament adventure at Gen Con 12 or something,
That's cool.
And we were like, man, can you imagine ever going to Gen Con? Can you imagine, like, playing in one of those tournaments, and then the thing that you play tested is published? Like, that's as far as our dreams went. We didn't think about man, someday I'm going to be a comic writer, or someday I'm going to work on D&D. It was, maybe we can go to a convention and meet the people who work on D&D and play test it. Like, that was as cool as I could have imagined my nerdy life being. And now I go to Gen Con every year, and I have a booth that I share with other authors that I've been doing for, more than a decade now. And my brother had still never been to Gen Con. And so Gen Con 50, I forget what year that was. Was it might have been 2017, 2018. Someone will check and find that I'm wrong. But for Christmas, I told my brother he was going to Gen Con for the first time.
Oh, wow.
And so I flew, I fly out to the show, and he flew with me. And he wasn't just going to get to go to the convention. He was going to get the Gold Star experience, because he was getting an exhibitor badge, and he was going to see the show before the show sets up. And all my industry friends, like, those are my peers and
Sure.
the people I know, those are some of his favorite authors and artists, you know what I mean? And so we go out for dinner with them, and we're hanging out with them, and I'm introducing him, and all that kind of stuff. And he's wandering around the shows like sparkles in his eyes, having this incredible experience. And I'm working my ass off. And Gen Con's one of my busiest, one of my best shows. And he was seeing, I think, for the first time, past social media. So if you look on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, you see selfies and, oh, look, this, gaming luminary came by and bought my book, or this, I went over to hang out with these guys, or this is me having beers with, these cool people. And it is all those things, and those things really happen, but you're also working 12-hour days, and, every meal you're either doing meetings, or you're running around like a chicken with your head cut off, or you're finding inventory for your booth, or you're managing all the little, things that need to happen to make a huge show like that go through smoothly. And so we would go out for meals, and I would be really quiet. And he's like, "Are you okay?" And I go, "Yeah, I'm just saving my energy up for when I get back to the booth, because if things keep going well, I'm going to interact with hundreds of people in the afternoon. And some of those people that come to the booth, they're going to meet you. That might be the only time they ever meet me in my whole career." Sure. And if they have 2 or 3 minutes of great interaction, they will buy my books for the rest of my life. And if they have a terrible interaction, they will go online and tell people I'm a piece of garbage, so you've got to be on. You have to be yourself, but like the best version of yourself when you're sitting at that table. I believe that very intrinsically, and he was seeing for the first time, like, how that worked, that every person coming over, you're giving them your full attention and as much of yourself and your social engagement as you can, and tuning the dials. It is you, but it's like, again, that best version of you, your most attentive version of you. And then you're doing it over and over and over and over again. And then we go out for an industry party, and then you're just crashing into bed, and then wake up at 7:30 in the morning, grab quick breakfast, and head to the con center. And he was like, "Oh, this is a job." Yeah. You could, that this isn't just fun and games and Jim tells stories for a living, but this is like really a lot. And that's not some nail my wrist to my forehead, "Oh, woe is me, I'm at Gen Con working on Dungeons and Dragons and Conan." I love it. I wouldn't do it if I didn't love it, but it can be a lot.
Yeah, it comes down to price.
We finished that weekend, and we're getting ready to go to the airport. And I looked over at him with this wry kind of smile, and I said, "Well, first one's free. Now it's on you. I can tell you had an amazing time. You got to pay for your own Gen Con from now on." And he glances over at me and he goes, "I don't think I'm coming back." And I was like, "What? How could you not want to come back?" And he looked at me, no word of a lie, with tears in his eyes. And he said, "It will never be better than that."
Damn. I mean, like, I think my eyes are getting a little watery right now. That's
He's
really
right, though.
beautiful.
He did have the ultimate con experience. You could, it was so pure, and it was so, and that's your first one. It was the ultimate one, in that kind of crazy way. So
that might be the most, look, if this is indeed the first episode of 2026, that is one hell of a story to kick us off.
Thank you.
Jim, I got two more questions for you. I mentioned the amount of just, how much of an open book you are when it comes to the industry and the work you do. I guess, is there any piece of advice that you would give to an aspiring writer that looks at your career and they're like, "Man, one day I want to have a, it's such a variety."
Yeah, I feel so weird about that question, because I wish I could say I had architected it out and I had planned out my career and I knew exactly every move I was making and why I was making it. but no career is like that. And everyone will tell you about the weird serendipities and the good and the bad and the ups and downs that they have. But I will tell you, like, staying in the game is most of the game. Like, that you've got to just keep putting work out there, and you've got to keep having the audacity to keep doing it, but also be humble enough to know you have a lot to learn. And that, and that you always start from a place of being a poor carbon copy of your influences, and then over the long haul you start finding your own voice and your own kind of things that make you who you are, and the time of storytelling that you see in yourself. And that doesn't mean that you're going to get what you want or get the opportunities that you want, but that you're putting out work that you as a reader would love to see and that you would be excited to see, rather than trend hopping or anything like that. Yeah.
Let me add to that. Actually, let me add to that question, because, like I said, you give out so much information. Who in the industry was your mentor, or that you could call a mentor?
Yeah.
And what was maybe the best lesson you got from said person?
One of the earliest mentors I had was Scott McCloud, the guy who wrote Understanding Comics. No, it's crazy.
What better mentor to have in comics than Scott McCloud?
I was doing a webcomic just for myself in between. I was working in animation independently, and then at Little Startup Studio, and I started doing my own webcomic in the evenings, just as sort of like a creative outlet. I had moved to a city where I didn't know a lot of people, and I saw these people making webcomics and putting them online. This is when Penny Arcade and PvP were just starting out, and things like that. And I started putting my own little webcomic online, and it had been going for 4 or 5 months, I think. And I was taking a break for Christmas, and it's different now. Social media and RSS feeds and all the auto propagation of the internet. This is before all that stuff. Like, I hand coded the HTML on my first website, and I wrote this kind of classic, tortured artist. Hey, I'm taking a break for the holidays, but I'm doing, please come back in January. I'm doing the best I can, but I know sometimes the pages aren't very good and I don't always know what I'm doing, but I'm so thankful you guys are reading, and I promise I'll work harder in the next year or whatever. And my email's right there on the front. My Hotmail address is right there on the front page. And Scott McCloud emailed me out of nowhere and just said, "You're doing a good job. Don't be so hard on yourself." And I was like, oh my God, Mr. McCloud, so freaking out. And then he just sent me his phone number, and we jumped on a phone and started chatting about comics and the industry and changing technology and all this kind of stuff. And he was the one who eventually convinced me to go to my first big convention as a professional. I went to San Diego Comic-Con 2002. Because of him, and he put me in touch with other comic book creators, and going to that show it transformed my life, not in the sense of like instant professionalism, opportunity, and publishing. It transformed my life in terms of connecting to a broader community of other creators and artists, that they were real people that I could interact with, and that I could be a part of that community and feel like I was one of them rather than on the sidelines. And then it would still take years for me to get my first professional gigs and for me to start getting paid, let alone be gainfully employed on a regular basis in comics. But it opened the door to the possibility. And Scott, one of his most amazing qualities is he treats everyone who makes comics like they're a worthy professional.
Wow.
He doesn't have these aspersions of that he's greater than you or that your work is lesser than based on your inexperience. He was always like, everyone is peers. I remember the very first time I met him in person, that was at that San Diego 2002. And I just came over his table, and I was so excited to finally meet him in person and shake his hand. And he was having a conversation with Chris Claremont. And as I come walking up, Scott says, "Oh, Jim," and gives me a quick handshake. And then immediately goes, "Chris, do you know Jim?" And now Chris Claremont is looking at my badge, and you can see the gears turning as he's embarrassed because he doesn't know who I am. And of course he doesn't know who I am. I'm nobody. I've literally got no professional footprint whatsoever. But as far as Scott was concerned, we were both comic book creators and we should know each other. And that, awesome. Just by its very example, I think really opened my eyes. I mean, think about it, that, Scott's the ultimate kind of let's look behind the curtain and show you how things function, right? And I think that was inspiring to me to sort of go, hey, I keep learning these things about writing and about working in the industry. I should write about this. I should share this with other people. And Scott very much, whether he intended it or not, was a model for that. So
that is incredible, man. Big shout out to Scott McCloud. I love hearing stories about Scott. Okay, and then oh man, I'm sorry. Okay, and I guess Jim, I'm like so like taken back by how awesome you've had some great story. I mean, the brother story had me teary eyed. Scott McCloud. I mean, that's awesome. I guess last question for you, Jim, as we wrap up. Like I said, this should be the first episode of 2026. Like I said, we're on issue 27, 28 of Conan by the time this episode comes out. You mentioned that it's going to run for 50 issues. What can people expect from the flagship title of Conan and from you come this year, 2026?
Sure. We've got some amazing, cool plans. I feel like we've hit such an incredible stride, but we're not going to slow down in any way, shape, or form. We've got a new event book that we're building up to. We've had this wonderful pattern where we do a free comic book day book that unveils our next big event. So we did a, Battle of the Blackstone free comic book day 2 years ago. This 2025, we did Scourge of the Serpent. Our next free comic book day and accompanying event has already been announced. It's called Tides of the Tyrant King. And I am very, very excited for people to check that out. It's going to be an absolute beauty. I get to work with Jesus Marino, who's an industry legend as well.
Yes.
And I have been so excited to work with him, and he's just phenomenal. Fernando Dagnino and Doug Braithwaite are doing just a phenomenal job on the flagship series month after month. I could not be more proud of them, and the collaboration with them is phenomenal. I'm doing some more stories for Savage Sword of Conan. I've got a story I'm doing right now with Ivan Gill, who just finished up on Scourge of the Serpent. And then there's more coming. Alex Horley and I had an incredible collaboration on Conan number 25, that fully painted King Conan issue. And we have more stories that we're going to be doing together as well. So it's main line in the Hyborian Age for me in 2026. And I've got a new creator-owned series that hopefully will be announced and launched before the year is out as well.
Hell yeah. Actually, speaking on the topic of creator-owned, I lie. I have one more question for you. And it's not even for me. It's for my buddy Josh, who listened to the show. Big shout out to Josh. I told him I was interviewing you, and he was like, I was like, you got any questions for him? He's like, actually, I do. Josh ask him why I can't seem to find the Skullkickers trades anywhere. I love that book.
Funny you mentioned that.
Wait.
So Skullkickers has been out of print for a little while at Image, but it's coming back. I should have said this. So in February, March, April, you're going to be able to get the Skullkickers new trade paperbacks being published by Oni Press. So they're called the Compact Attack editions, and they're going to be coming out. Each volume has essentially got 2 volumes worth of the old Image trade paperbacks. And we've got brand new covers by Edwin Huang and Misty Coates, our original artists on Skullkickers. And those are going to be all collected together in those 3 volumes. And there's eventually going to be a slipcase of all 3 of them that you'll be able to get as well. So my very first Sword and Sorcery series is going to be back in print. Skullkickers is an absolutely wonderful series that really transformed my life and put me on the map in terms of sword and sorcery and got me my first regular gigs in comics. So very, very special to me. And for people who've never read it before, it's a bit like Deadpool meets Dungeons and Dragons. 2 monster hunting mercenaries kill bad guys and get themselves in danger and have to kill their way out. So it's a lot of fun.
Hell yeah. I'm literally like texting him as your I'm a stenographer. I'm like, Jim said 3 volumes total. Okay, you know what? Fuck it. I got one more bonus question because how can I have you on the show and not ask you a Udon related question?
That'd be awesome. Yeah.
Not only have you written a bunch of Street Fighter comics, but I noticed that you also get credited as editor on a ton of the Udon Capcom art books, which I love. I have just about every single one of them. If you know anything about those books, some of them are out of print and very pricey. I guess I would like, if I had to ask one question about that, how was it? I guess, did you get access? Like you mentioned, you had access to like all of this Conan material for writing the flagship series. Did you get the same treatment from Capcom when working on some of these art books?
Udon's got an incredible relationship with Capcom. Those Udon Street Fighter comics started in, I want to say 2003. And I was at the studio. I joined originally as a colorist. It was supposed to be a summer job. And by the end of that summer, I had sort of wedged my way in at the studio, and I worked my way up from colorist to illustrator. Eventually, I was a project manager, an art director, and editor. And so I was sort of the number 2 guy at the studio, running projects and helping to manage the studio with Eric Coe, who's the owner and one of the founders. And so eventually Eric was handling all the comic book publishing, and then I was handling kind of non-comic book stuff. So things like the original art books. And one of the things, Capcom was very kind of a closed door in terms of foreign publishing, and we were able to crack that open and start doing official English translated art books, which kind of transformed a bunch of the industry. You see now those video game art books being translated into English quite rapidly, but that was not the norm back in 2004, 2005, 2006. And so we were able to kind of get a toehold in there and convince them that this was a viable market, and we were going to treat the work, with the respect it deserved. And our translation team was amazing. Our editorial team was great. And yeah, we got access to the Capcom archives, both in terms of those art books and then everything else. And it gave me the chance to travel to Japan. I got to go to, things like the Tokyo Video Game Conference, or go to the Capcom head offices and hanging out with those guys. We found out about secret projects like Street Fighter 4 before it was announced to the public by over a year, because we were going to be doing tie-in comics and, art books and all kinds of things like that. It was an amazing experience. It was so much fun. And that crew, I learned so much about business and contracts and publishing and conventions. And it gave me access to a whole different side of the industry. So, it's funny, my creative career has gone through these waves and these different eras. There was sort of that web comic era where I was just getting my feet wet and figuring out comics. Then there's the Udon era where I get known in kind of the anime and manga space and video game space. Then I transition over to doing my own creator-owned stuff at Image. And then eventually, Jim Zub, kind of the comic book writer who does stuff for Marvel and D&D, and now Conan. And it could be a kind of weird to me, because I'll see people at conventions who know me from different eras, and they're asking me different kinds of questions. So the webcomic guys, like, I'm good friends with the Penny Arcade guys, and now they're known for PAX, their own video game convention and all that. But to me, they're just, like, that's just Jerry. Like, he's just one of the guys at Penny Arcade, but he's a big deal, in this space or whatever. Or, I go to Japan and I see a bunch of the Capcom guys, or some of the other, companies we work with at Sony and Konami and Bandai and all those different companies. And they know me through a different kind of lens, and now the comic book creator kind of Jim. So it's all very weird in all kind of best ways.
I can only, last thing I'll say about Udon and Capcom, even though I can go for another hour, is it must have been absolutely just insane to be able to see all of these original pieces of art, or even like unseen art from like Bingus and Akima.
It's unbelievable.
Like Shikiro.
Getting to meet those guys as well.
Whoa.
So a lot of them are not. They don't let themselves be photographed and things like that. I remember we convinced several of the artists to come to San Diego Comic-Con for the first time when we were doing the first official translation of one of the Capcom art books. And like Kinu Nishimura, who's done tons of amazing design work for Darkstalkers and Street Fighter over the years. We were at a restaurant with Kinu, and she was just doing sketches for all the Udon people. And she did a Chun-Li sketch that's still framed up in my house, at that dinner. And then the Udon artists were doing drawings for her, and we were like trading art around the table. Like, we had dinner, and then I think we stayed at that restaurant for another 3 hours. And once the staff realized who these people were, they just gave us wide berth and brought over a bottle of wine. And I think they were just excited to have us in the restaurant. Like, it was just so wild.
That's awesome.
It was so fun, and it was such a cool experience. And it's the kind of thing that it's hard to describe, like that kind of stuff, like getting to know any of those guys. It was just such a cool and again, transformative kind of experience. And Eric Coe, my boss at Udon, he's a dyed-in-the-wool fanboy. He loves this stuff so much. And it was a point of pride to get to know them and to become friends with them and to treat their work with the respect that it deserves. And the relationships he's built up with those Japanese publishers is now so strong because they respect him and they love the quality of the books that he puts out. And he goes to Japan like twice a year. And yes, he's going to negotiate for licenses and stuff like that, but you can do all that over email and Zoom now.
Sure.
He does it because he wants to travel and he loves to visit them and he loves going out for good food. And Eric is, I tell so many people, he's one of the smartest, best business people in comics and publishing, pop culture publishing, but he's like a silent killer. Like no one understands how well connected and how well respected and how thoughtful and careful he is. And how, as a person, he would give you the shirt off his back, that he is such a giving and wonderful guy, And I remember going to those conventions and we would stay up till dawn talking about entertainment and publishing and, our dreams and aspirations and all that kind of stuff. And when I started to get my own comics out there, he was so proud of me. And even though it meant that I was going to be leaving Udon, he knew that that's where my heart was, that I needed to write stories, not just execute projects, for other people's IPs. So
damn, that's great. Jim, this has been fantastic. And if I don't stop this now, I will go down another 2-hour rabbit hole talking about this. So with that being said, we'll have to do a part 2, maybe later this year.
Sure.
With that being said, ladies and gents, this is the Shortbox Podcast, and we just finished talking to Jim Zub about so many things. We talked about Conan. We talked about Dungeons & Dragons. We talked about writing. We talked about Udon and Capcom. I mean, what more could you ask for? I know what I can ask you. Go ahead and give Jim Zub a follow on your favorite social media app, all right? I'm going to have links to his website, which I highly recommend you check out. I'll have links to the TED Talk we talked about. Check out the show notes for all your links and needs and all of that stuff. And make sure you give him a follow. Jim, this has been great. I wish you the best of luck with what you got going on. And thanks so much for sharing your time and your stories.
Thanks, man. I'm glad it all worked out so well. I know it's been a long time coming, and I hope we get a chance to chat again.